want to thank everyone for coming here, especially it's nice to see so many of my fellow ambassadors here. I've treasured the opportunity to work with you over the course of time that I've been here over the past 14 months. And it's great to see so many other people here that I know and to meet so many new people during the course of the evening. When I was invited to speak here, I thought, oh, great, what an easy topic, security in the Mediterranean. You could have picked a little bit easier topic for me. I was thinking maybe something like Brexit or something like the price of oil. But you picked one of the hardest topics and one of the most complex things to comment on tonight. What I will do tonight is I will talk about how the current administration has viewed this region and what we plan to do over the next few weeks. I know many of you are probably expecting or hoping that I would talk about how the new president will look at these issues. But it's by practice, we don't comment on the positions of new administrations before they take place. But I would like to note, nonetheless, that many of our longstanding U.S. foreign policy goals and strategies have bipartisan consensus, including, for example, strong bipartisan support for Cyprus and for a secure Mediterranean. What I'll do is talk about some of our priorities and concerns and about some particular countries in the Mediterranean. I won't talk about all countries, otherwise I'd be here until tomorrow. So if you bear with me, if I touch upon things briefly, and some things I'll go more in depth. But I thought by starting on this fourth week of November, perhaps it is best to start by reflecting upon this year. Here in the Eastern Mediterranean, we saw the civil war in Syria enter its sixth year, several terrorist attacks and the attempted coup in Turkey, and the unending exodus of hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, and continued tensions in the Levant countries. But it has also been a year when we've seen some encouraging signs, most of all the discussions here in Cyprus to reunify the island, which we hope will continue despite the apparent recent setback in Switzerland. The increasing collaboration of Cyprus, Egypt, and Israel, and the economic prospects of such a partnership also give us hope. I will speak about these developments later. But first, let me turn to the challenges in the region. I should begin with Syria. There is no way to look at what is happening on the ground in Syria and not feel profound feelings of grief. Now in its sixth year, the conflict in Syria has triggered the worst refugee crisis since the end of World War II. Secretary Kerry has called this the most horrific mass exodus of modern times. More than 6.5 million Syrians have left their homeland. Up to 1.5 million have died in the conflict itself. This weekend brought even greater signs of devastation and horror. Intense airstrikes destroyed the last 3 hospitals in the rebel-held eastern Aleppo. The heavy bombardment has killed nearly 300 civilians. And as the National Security Advisor at the White House said this weekend, such actions must be condemned. We all wish there was a simple answer that would end the civil war. But there isn't such an answer. The roots of the conflict are many, and it will take many years to address them. But the priorities must be to have a sustained end of hostilities, to get humanitarian assistance to civilians who have been tragically trapped between the sides, to degrade ISIL and al-Qaeda, and then to create an environment in which Syrian-led negotiations toward a political transition can take place. We're committed, the International Syria Support Group is committed, and the UN is committed to trying to get the political talks back on track so we can get a transitional process in place. We don't know what the results of that process will be, but from our view in the United States, President Assad cannot be part of the long-term future of Syria. The end of Syria's civil war is critical for international efforts to destroy ISIL. There are many groups espousing violent ideologies, but the most violent, most destructive, and most dangerous is ISIL, also known as Daesh. 2 years ago, ISIL was expanding its territory, recruiting budding violent extremists, and threatening to overrun even Baghdad and Erbil. It represented the greatest threat to the stability and future of this vital region. But now that momentum has shifted dramatically against ISIL, and here's why. First, the mobilization of partners to broaden the campaign against ISIL has been very successful. Each of the 67 countries in the anti-ISIL coalition plays a vital role, from providing military and humanitarian support, to stopping ISIL's financing and funding, to impeding the flow of foreign fighters. The United States has put more American special forces into the efforts in Syria itself and expanded training efforts for groups that were effective in fighting ISIL. Coalition members have largely cleared ISIL from Syria Turkey's border, cut terrorist supply lines and financing, removed terrorist commanders from the battlefield, and stemmed the flow of foreign fighters. In the last year and a half, we have set up a structure working effectively with partners and with Iraqi forces on the ground that has put ISIL on the defensive. A 100,000-strong alliance of Iraqi forces with air and ground support from the U.S.-led coalition has nearly surrounded Mosul. But tragically, though, in Mosul, we also are coming face to face with ISIL's brutality, with the targeted mass killings of civilians. And although we have accomplished much, we also face some urgency. We must effectively end ISIL's self-proclaimed geographic caliphate by taking back the last major urban center it holds, Raqqa in Syria. Raqqa is ISIL's central planning node for external operations against Turkey, against Europe, against the United States, against the world. We're in the initial stages of isolating and eventually liberating Raqqa, a significant effort that is going to continue. But as we see with the ongoing liberation of Mosul, these campaigns will not be easy. But we stand resolute in our efforts to defeat ISIL. While we face the urgent challenges of the civil war in Syria and of ISIL, we also need to look at what led to such instability in the region. About 1/4 to 1/2 of the populations in Algeria, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Libya, Morocco, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Syria, Tunisia, and Yemen are under the age of 25. These young people have limited prospects for work. And as U.S. Deputy Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said a few months ago, we know that extremism thrives in the shadows of personal, social, political, and economic marginalization, capitalizing on the grievances of those who feel cast aside, left behind, ignored, or repressed. We look to counter that influence with the bright light of education, inclusion, tolerance, good governance, and opportunity. In that context, the argument for democratic reform in the Middle East seems even clearer today than when the Arab Spring began. For peace to really happen, citizens' demands for inclusive, responsive governance must be addressed. The United States is helping to build resilient democratic societies by working with local partners to improve the transparency and accountability of governments, foster pluralism and respect for human rights, and support expanding participation by civil society, youth, minorities, and women. The work of change is ongoing. Look at Tunisia, for example, where democracy has endured terrorist attacks and economic stress. We have pressed our partners, including Saudi Arabia, to release political prisoners and open political space. We have urged political reconciliation in Bahrain so that the opposition can run in elections in 2018. The United States also seeks to address the problems that led to hopelessness in the region. When people have access to opportunity, they have hope for the future. So we are investing in the fragile success stories. For example, we boosted our aid to Tunisia by more than 1/3 in the last year. Through assistance funds, the United States is providing basic and higher education, providing job training, and offering help to small businesses. The United States supports opportunity and good governance because these policies reflect our values as Americans, but also because, as we've tragically seen in the past years, their absence leads to violence and extremism. The refugee crisis facing Europe and the rest of the world is the human face of the violent extremism in the Middle East, the civil war in Syria, and the lack of opportunity. One need look no further than the front pages of any newspaper to see stories of the dangerous passages most refugees face, their pain and their courage. The mass exodus of millions of people also is raising issues of national sovereignty and EU solidarity. The issue of refugees, however, is not just for the region and for Europe to address. At the Leaders' Summit of Refugees in September, President Obama brought together world leaders to galvanize additional humanitarian support, improve access to education and lawful work for refugees, and expand opportunities for refugee resettlement. The United States accepted 85,000 of the world's most vulnerable refugees so far this year and plans to accept 100,000 in 2017. Over 72% of the resettled refugees were women and children. Beyond accepting refugees, the United States is also doing what it can to help countries in crisis through policy, advocacy, and assistance. Inside Syria, despite the evident difficulties, we've increased access to water, provided food, and renovated health facilities for internally displaced peoples. Within Iraq, where 2.8 million are displaced, the United States is working with the Iraqi government and civil society to improve the delivery of basic essential services and to increase the protection of vulnerable populations. U.S. funds are also helping support such needs as food assistance, medical care, shelter, water, and sanitation in Lebanon, Jordan, Iraq, and Egypt. We will provide, for example, $290 million in U.S. development assistance to Jordan and Lebanon for increased access to high-quality education. This educational assistance will reach around 230,000 Syrian refugees in Jordan and 62,000 in Lebanon. Likewise, for the almost 3 million refugees in Turkey, U.S. assistance has supported food, basic assistance, shelter, and protection services, among other things. We also have programs to support refugee integration in Europe, including one in Cyprus. We have initiated a project to teach English to refugees living in the camp in Kofino in order to help them integrate and become productive members of society, wherever their new homes might be. Now let me turn to Turkey. Every day the conflict continues in Syria, it has an impact on Turkey. Nearly 3 million refugees alone have fled to Turkey. And on its borders and from within, Turkey faces a direct terrorist threat from ISIL and its supporters, and from the PKK, whose attacks only succeed in undermining legitimate aspirations and rights of Turkey's Kurdish citizens. We have called on the PKK to cease its senseless, brutal attacks, and we continue to stand by Turkey in this fight. The attempted coup was a direct challenge to the Turkish state and to the Turkish people. And they have a right and responsibility to pursue those who plotted it, to protect the government and the people against further attacks and threats to public order. Nonetheless, the United States is deeply concerned by the Turkish government's detentions of opposition members of parliament and by government restrictions on internet access and independent media. As Deputy Secretary Blinken has said, we have urged and will continue to urge the Turkish government to respond to the failed coup in ways that reinforce public confidence in the rule of law and Turkey's traditions of freedom of expression and pluralism, the very principles and institutions that the Turkish people so courageously defended in that time of crisis. The health and vibrancy of Turkish democracy matters and is important to long-term stability of Turkey. Turkey remains an important NATO ally and our partner. We work side by side and in partnership with other members of the international community to address the range of challenges, including the fight against ISIL, the Syrian civil war, the global refugee crisis, and the threat posed by violent extreme groups. We also have spoken frequently with President Erdogan and his government about playing a constructive role in solving the Cyprus problem. President Erdogan has frequently voiced support for the settlement process and for Turkish Cypriot leader Mustafa Akinci. And we will continue to urge Turkey to support the Cypriot-led process to reach a unified, bizonal, bi-communal federal Cyprus. Now let me speak about Israel. The historically strong and deep U.S.-Israeli friendship is well known and is based on our shared values. We work closely with the Israeli government on many regional issues while seeking to resolve the dispute between Israel and the Palestinians. It is long-standing U.S. policy that we support a negotiated settlement and a two-state solution that allows for Israelis and Palestinians to live together in peace and security. Israel's security, however, remains a critical goal of U.S. foreign policy. Now let me move on to Lebanon. The people of Lebanon recently elected President Michel Aoun in accordance with Lebanon's constitution. We see this as a moment of opportunity as Lebanon emerges from years of political impasse to restore government functions and build a more stable and prosperous future for all Lebanese citizens. As Lebanon forms a new government, we look to all parties to uphold Lebanon's international obligations, including those contained in various UN Security Council resolutions. The United States will continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with the Lebanese people and support Lebanon's independence, sovereignty, security, and stability. Now on to Egypt. Egypt has always been and is the historical center of the Arab world. It has a quarter of the Arab population. We are deeply committed to the stability of Egypt and to helping Egypt through the difficult challenges that it faces: economic challenges, challenges of counterterrorism, challenges in the Sinai, and challenges of the region. Egypt is an extremely important partner in so many different ways because of the critical role it has always played in the Middle East, the role it has played as a leader in the Arab world. Now turning to Iran. Iran has remained high on the U.S. foreign policy agenda due to its formerly illicit nuclear program, support for terrorism, and destabilizing activities in the region. One of the Obama administration's most important diplomatic achievements was the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, which constrains any Iranian attempt to build a nuclear bomb. As Secretary Kerry said a couple of weeks ago, it is very important to note that the Iranians have dismantled centrifuges, lowered the stockpile, and transported enriched uranium out of the country. As a result, the region is less volatile and the world itself is safer from nuclear proliferation. We remain concerned, however, about Iran's continued support for terrorist groups and will continue to impose sanctions over such behavior. It can be hard to look out at the landscape that I just surveyed or look back on events in the region in the last few years and not feel a sense of pessimism. But there have also been positive events happening, including the efforts by the leaders here in Cyprus to reunify the island as a bizonal, bi-communal federation that advances the interests of all Cypriots. Of course, we are all disappointed by the most recent round of discussions in Switzerland did not have a more positive outcome. But I think we all hope that the two sides find a way forward to continue the great progress they have made on a number of difficult issues in order to overcome the remaining obstacles. I've gotten to know both leaders over my year plus here in Cyprus, and I continue to be struck by their dedication, intellect, and sincerity. A just, lasting, comprehensive solution for Cyprus could have historic and far-reaching impact. It will improve economic opportunity for all the people of Cyprus and enhance energy security in the Mediterranean region and beyond. It would demonstrate to the world today what can be achieved through dialogue, compromise, and democracy, a powerful and positive model and inspiration for all. Another positive development is the discovery of hydrocarbons and what that could mean for this region, economically and politically. But before I talk about this region, let me first describe the situation in the United States, which has been transformed into a leading energy power. That is true in oil, gas, wind and solar efficiency, and research and development. We've increased oil production from 5.5 million to about 9 million barrels per day, and have transitioned from being a significant and increasing importer of gas to an important exporter. By the end of the decade, it is possible that the United States may match Qatar in export volume of LNG. So when people state that the only reason the United States cares about the Eastern Mediterranean is because of our energy needs, you can see why we think this is an odd statement to make. The discoveries here are important, but for the people and the countries of the region. Discoveries offshore in Cyprus, Israel, Egypt, and potentially Lebanon have already redefined regional relationships, and I believe will continue to be a catalyst for increased economic and political cooperation through interconnection and integration. As the State Department's envoy for energy, Amos Hochstein, has stated, we see a future for the region that includes new and old pipelines connecting Israel's offshore resources to Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and the Palestinian Authority. As Amos recently told the U.S. Congress, this vision includes Cypriot gas exports to Turkey and Egypt, allowing Egypt to satisfy its own power needs and export surpluses to international markets via existing but now idle LNG terminals. New resources will allow Turkey to diversify its heavy dependence on a small number of suppliers and use its extensive pipeline network to reach Europe as well. The Eastern Mediterranean can play a role in freeing Central and Southeast Europe from their overwhelming dependence on Russian gas. But the success of all these plans, however, hinges on cooperation. I've done my best to give you a toward horizon of the region, though much more could have been said, including a mention of the countries I didn't get a chance to mention. But I want to reiterate that the United States will continue to support the people of the broader Eastern Mediterranean as they strive for peace and prosperity, and to help build the foundations for inclusive and responsive governments. American initiatives to lead the coalition fighting ISIL, to mitigate the refugee crisis, to encourage good governance and opportunity, while containing Iran's nuclear program and defending Israel, are our long-standing priorities for this region. For decades, we've been unwavering in our support to the people of Cyprus, and we believe that despite the recent setback, the prospects for a resolution of the Cyprus problem are still the best they have been in decades. The United States offers its full support to the two leaders as they try to bring together the Cypriot people and bring an end to the island's division. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.